Hey, I'm Shaye Wanner, and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Whether you are a seasoned rancher or just curious about the cattle world, this podcast dives into the stories, science, and strategies shaping the future of ranching. Let's get started and keep your herd ahead of the herd. Folks, today we are visiting with Thaddeus Tharp about how to best work with ag lenders, the benefits of incorporating technology, and what to think about before you decide to scale your operation. Thaddeus has a strong agriculture and beef background and also serves as an ag lender for clients across the country. So he's very well versed in what it takes to make a cattle operation work from the boots on the ground perspective as well as the number side. Remember to like, rate, and review or share this show with a friend to help this podcast grow, and do the same for all your other favorite podcasts. With that, let's visit with Thaddeus.
Want to boost your ranch profitability? Choose Red Angus. Celebrated as the beef industry's most favored female, Red Angus cattle are a consistent source of traditional Angus traits, including carcass quality, maternal characteristics, calving ease, and moderate size. Over the past decade, Red Angus registrations have surged by 24%. Elevate your herd with Red Angus by heading to redangus.org to connect with the Red Angus team.
Alrighty, Thaddeus. Well, it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, and I'm excited to hear your perspective about everything we're going to chat about. But before we dive into your background, the question I always love to ask guests, regardless of what their role in the beef industry is why do you believe in the beef industry?
Well, there's no better life to be lived than on a cow farm was a quote from someone, and I think that rings true. The beef industry is one of the last parts of agriculture that is still an independent producer group, and I think that's pretty awesome that, everybody can cowboy up and keep doing what they know to do and do well.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to be talking a little bit about your position and perspective as an ag lender today, but did you grow up with an agriculture background, or is it something that you kind of became involved in through other careers or your current career?
So I grew up in a rural community in Western Illinois, and I still live in Western Illinois today, but my family farmed up until the 80s, and they were on the wrong side of history in the 80s. So fast forward to today, and 10 years ago, I am a small cattle operator here in Western Illinois. I do some grass calves and run some mother cows. My wife and I and our two little boys live out in the country on the farm, and that's a dream come true for a kid that grew up in town. So we're active in the beef industry ourselves. I've been in the beef industry myself for many years. I started out in ag retail. I worked at a local co-op as an operator as well as a salesman in the fertilizer and chemical realm. Did that through college. When I got out of college, I started a feed and supply store here in Western Illinois, and through an uncanny chain of events, the good Lord just opening doors. I went to work, had a guy that wanted to buy me out of business from the feed store, and my bank was asking me to come be a loan officer and had some family things I had to take care of. So that's what I did. I sold the store and went to work at a local community bank, and that's the first white-collar job I'd ever had. Worked there for 3.5 years, and being inside the office from 8 to 4 was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Even scooping pins was an easier job than being in the office. But came across this Land O'Lakes finance company and got to looking into it, and it's been a perfect fit ever since. What I do today is focus on animal agriculture, and that's what I love, and I'm very fortunate to do it. So that's kind of my quick background in a nutshell.
So how has your ag background and previous endeavors shaped your perspective as an ag lender?
I personally think it's been the best way to do it for me. I've had a couple customers in the past. One guy coined the term, well, you're kind of like a blue-collar banker, and I like that, And it's fine to take that career path, but a business degree, my degree is in growing corn. I have an agronomy degree from Western Illinois University, and I always make the joke, if you'd ask any math teacher I ever had that I would work in finance, they'd fall out of their chair laughing, you know. So I think it's prepared me well from the entrepreneurship side of life, borrowing money myself to do those things, being in the cattle markets with feeder cattle and mother cows like I am, you know, guys, I think appreciate the fact that I've got skin in the same game that they do, you know, maybe not as large of a facet as them, but it's easy to make decisions when you're sitting behind the desk of, well, you'd ought to just sell them and do this and, you know, price protect that. But when you're sitting on the producer side, it's a totally different chair. And I think I'm very fortunate to have a perspective from both sides of the desk.
Absolutely. Multiple perspectives always opens up your eyes to kind of the bigger picture. So I think that's very valuable. So you mentioned that you are working with livestock producers. Can you elaborate a little bit more on, a little bit more about what type of ag lending that you work in and are passionate about?
Yeah, so Land O'Lakes Finance Company has been around for, you know, since the 70s, really. And we've evolved into a lender of anything ag anywhere in the country. So we're unique in the aspect that we don't really have a geography we're tied to. For instance, I live in Western Illinois, and the bulk of my portfolio is in the Pacific Northwest. So I finance a lot of feeder cattle and finishing operations, as well as some other cow ranches out in Idaho, Oregon, Washington, Utah, Nevada. We've got customers in Mississippi and the Delta region. We've done some feed stores in Texas and Georgia and South Carolina, and we're just very fortunate that we do ag and that's all we do. So from a cattle perspective, I finance and get to work with stocker operators in the West and some in the Central Plains and cow-calf operators all over the country. But that's the core. As a company, we can do anything ag anywhere in the country. But for me personally, what I focus on is cattle and real estate. We've done some large ranch acquisitions, you know, purchases out in the West, and it's really neat to see the rest of the country and how it operates.
Yeah, I bet you get to see a lot of diverse operations doing a lot of different things, not being tied down to a geographical area.
Yeah, finishing cattle in Illinois is a totally different ball game. You're playing the same game, but the way you execute the game is totally different than when you're in a feed yard in Texas or in the southern hills of Idaho. But you're playing the same game just in a different arena, you know. So
Yeah. Well, regardless of where your customers are located, when you think about your clients that you have a really good relationship with, what are some of those factors that make it a good relationship?
the relationship is the most important thing. I think a lot of times a lender gets looked at as you just keep them at arm's length. I'm going to tell you what I think you need to know, and then that's about all. You know, we're not going to discuss everything. And I understand that. But when you get to work closely with someone to the point that you form a friendship and relationship, professional relationship, that's very valuable. So in that, you have to be able to trust what you're doing with each other. And I guess to segue back to that original comment of, you know, most people hold a banker at arm's length, but I view it as we're on the same team, working for the same goals, and my job is to help you win because that's what we need. We need more operators in the country. We need more independent cattle producers, both feeders and mother cows. You know, if you look at cow numbers today, we need more mother cows, and it's a hard game to get into. But the guys that are good long-term operators, they know their numbers inside and out. They're transparent with those numbers inside and out, and they don't lie to themselves when they lose money. You get to actually be honest in, well, that didn't work so good, you know.
So, when you're talking about your clients knowing their numbers and sharing those numbers with you, how organized do you feel like most of your clients are with having those numbers? Do some of them have pretty good systems in place? I mean, what's that like? Because whether you're feeding cattle or ranching, it's a lot of numbers to keep track of.
Especially as you expand. I work with guys that their numbers are in their head or written on the dash of the pickup from ration to ration. And, one thing we do as a company is a monthly borrowing base, so we're tracking inventories with you every month and seeing what the equity position in those cattle look like. And, year over year, in and out, the guys that improve their number managing capability, you can see a steady growth in those guys and gals, I should say, because there's some gal feeders out there too. And especially in the cattle world, in agriculture in general, there's a consolidation happening, and that wave is not going to stop. So we have to become more efficient. And you can't manage what you can't measure, what you don't measure. So the efficiency of knowing your numbers, not only from rations, but also your break evens and marketing positions and all of those things. You can't study your numbers enough, really, is what it comes down to.
Support your cattle's health and productivity with Vigortone minerals. Since 1912, Vigortone has been a trusted name in animal nutrition. The revitalized product line offers targeted nutrition for every stage of production and every region. Vigortone delivers consistent performance and simplifies your mineral decisions. Wherever you are, Vigortone works. Visit vigortone.com to learn more, and that link is also in the show notes. Would you say there are specific numbers that are more important for you to know as a lender, or do you really like to see the full picture?
Personally, because I'm a cattle guy, I like to see the full picture. Again, I get to work all over the country, so I get to see unique things all over the place where, there's been times where guys have taught me stuff and I've taught guys things. From a lender's perspective, the rancher and cattle producer, your balance sheet has to be strong in certain categories, and, you need your working capital. Working capital is king, and, being able to track that and watch the fluidity of that working capital in a rising and a declining market. Those are huge things to track and know. When it comes to feeding, your cost of gain is king above all else. I'm on the Illinois Beef Association board, and that's something we talk about all the time is, man, we want more cattle to be fed in the Midwest. We've got the corn, we've got the byproducts, it's all right here. Well, when you go stand in a feedlot in southern Idaho or Utah, the rock is about at the top or 2 inches down. So to build 1,000 head capacity in Illinois is a totally different ballgame than building 1,000 head capacity in some of these more arid regions. And so cost of production, what is your fixed asset cost actually costing you to be able to put the gain on those cattle? And you need to figure in your interest expense and your depreciation and those things. So it's not just as easy as filling a bucket and going and feeding. And sadly, that's the most beautiful part of it. But there's all these numbers that muddy the waters,
So for those feeders who really just are, passionate about the feeding, maybe that's why they got into it. It wasn't because of the numbers. How do you help them maybe overcome that lack of confidence or the overwhelm that can come from trying to organize and keep track of all the numbers that are running, that they need to run past every day or just keep track of in general?
Well, at the end of the day, that comes down to personal responsibility. You have to take the initiative to, there's two different segments to it in my mind, and I read this in a book one time of working in the business or working on the business. I love working in the business. I love going and filling the cake feeder and feeding cows and checking cows and, running them through the chute when I have to. Like, that's the romantic part of the job that we do. But you have to work, that's working in the business. You have to work on the business in order to stay in the business long run is really what it boils down to. So I can only encourage folks to track those numbers as hard as they should. But I think if someone is truly motivated to grow, they're going to see the numbers and realize that's a focal point that they have to have.
So outside of, being transparent with their ag lender and being accountable for their own numbers, Is there anything else that you see in common between your really successful customers?
I think it goes without saying you have to work hard. If you're going to own your own business of any type, work-life balance really isn't a thing when you're building it, and that's just part of that course. I would say my most successful clientele, everybody in agriculture, especially the cow business, knows what risk is because you have to have it every day to be able to do it. But there's a difference between risk and calculated risk. You can jump headlong into $4,500 bred heifers, and in 2 years' time, that calf market can really be a whole different ballgame. So it's calculating into a risk. But there again, being too conservative doesn't pay as well either. So there's a balance of taking risk, but taking calculated risk and following through on that risk. When it gets tough, you got to keep going. And that's not always easy to do. And outside factors weigh into the farm all the time. You've got to balance family. You've got to balance your kids. You've got to balance a lot of those things that are all a part of being a producer. But at the end of the day, it's got a cash flow. Otherwise, you don't get to do it as long as you want to.
So on that risk management topic, whether you're working with ranchers or feeders or other people in the cattle business, what are some risk management strategies you like them to consider or think about?
Price protection of some sort. A few years ago, and I can't tell you when LRP first came about, but it's been a very good tool for the stocker operator and the backgrounder. Even into the finisher, it's getting a little more advantageous in the finisher, but there's not a lender in the world that is going to deter you from doing some form of price protection. You need to understand and have a conversation about margin calls before you get to a margin call. A margin call turns out to be a good thing. It's not fun when you're writing the checks, but you've got a break-even set. You got a floor price set is the correct way of saying it. And that's another thing that separates good long-run base hit operators is that they're willing to give up. They're setting price floors in most any kind of market so they know they're hitting a base hit as opposed to, man, this thing's got $10 left in it. I can feel it. And it only goes up 5 and then it goes down 40, Year in and year out on a 10 to 20 year average, using price protection, those operators will be more profitable, in my opinion, than someone staying open and unprotected the whole way through. Now, that being said, I sent a ton of margin call money to Chicago from October of 24 through, January of 25. So I know that that's not any fun and nobody likes doing those things, but I knew where my floor was at and I was okay with it. So once you make a sale, move on. That's something I have struggled with personally and seen guys struggle with is, yeah, I priced those cattle 2 weeks too early and I could have got another $5, but you know what? When you sold them, you saw a profit and you took it. Now start making a plan on the next set of cattle.
It sounds like you're encouraging producers to really have long-term goals and a long-term vision for some of their plans as well.
The cow game is not a short-run game. If you're in the cattle business, you already have a long-term mindset. You might not know it, but the cow game is a long-term game. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some, but making that overall plan of where am I going to try to be 10 years from now and how do I get there definitely is the way I look at it. Back when Performance Beef was gracious enough to have me in an article there, I don't know, a year ago or so, the one thing I tried to reiterate there was teamwork again. You as a cow person, somebody in the beef business is not a standalone guy. You need to surround yourself with the right teammates. Your lender is a teammate, your insurance company is your teammate, your hedging and LRP, those things, those are all part of your team. An accountant, that's a huge thing. And as tax laws change, you need to have a very good teammate in your bookkeeper and tax accounting. And, there's a struggle right there that's worth mentioning is as you grow, letting go of the responsibility of tracking those numbers and the bookkeeping and all of those things, again, working in versus working on the business, that's money well spent at a certain level that you bring on someone to help you manage those numbers, because at some point that turns into a full-time job of itself, and it's sooner rather than later. So surround yourself with the right people that you can trust and have a strong relationship with, and build a good team. That's truly, truly how I feel. It takes a team to make it fly.
So I want to go back to, you talked about scaling and letting some stuff go. I want to go back and touch more on that, but you did bring up performance beef. Is that something that some of your successful clients are using, or other clients are finding beneficial to include on their operations?
Oh, for sure. There's a lot of feeding software out there. Generally in the Midwest, performance beef has definitely got a strong foothold in the market, and I see it all over the country, actually. But yes, leveraging technology to make yourself more efficient and help you, recognize trends and build better decisions for the next pen. In the world we live in today, if you're not leveraging technology, you're missing the boat.
So what makes performance beef so valuable for both your customers and you as someone on their team?
Technology in general, performance beef included for sure, is the accumulation of pertinent data and being able to analyze that data quickly. You can have all the data sets in the world, but if you're looking, there's some things out there that don't add any value to your decision making. So I think the beautiful part, personally from my experience with performance beef, is it really dials you into pertinent data. I mean, performance beef will do a lot more, and all those feedlot technologies, they'll do a lot more than you can even begin to utilize, really. But if you get it set up right, it's aggregating the data and picking the data sets that make a difference in what you do. And then you can look at the numbers all day long, but if you don't do something about them, it doesn't do you any good. So then taking what you've learned from the data and actually implementing that into the next turn of cattle. Okay, the cost of gain on this pen was too high. Why was it too high? Okay, you can go through your feedstuffs, yardage, death loss, vet, okay, how do we make that better on the next pen? Well, if you fed this group for 180 days, you don't really remember what you were feeding on day 4. But when you have the technology in place, you know what, on day 4 we screwed up, and that set us back 30 days in getting this group done. So again, it turns into data points and using that data to make changes and create efficiency.
Is it pretty easy for producers to share that with you? I mean, is the format pretty user-friendly for not only themselves, but people on their team to access it when necessary?
I know Performance Beef has the ability, like individual users can set you up as the lender to be able to go in and look at what they're doing at any given time. Now, I've never actually been a part of that. But there again, the guys I work with, when they're using their technology, it's pretty easy to put that together and aggregate it and say, now look here, this is what happened on that pin, So I definitely think a seamless interaction is very valuable.
Calling all ranchers. If you are looking for a better way to optimize your grazing operation and rev up your bottom line, Noble Research Institute can help. Noble's team of ranch managers and researchers work together to find solutions to your challenges. They don't just give you answers, they can help you understand how to apply their research-tested and field-proven principles on your ranch. Visit noble.org to learn more and browse Noble's educational resources.
So it sounds like we could maybe add technology to that list of characteristics or traits for your successful customers too.
Yeah, very much so. The world moves faster every day, and technology's in the driver's seat.
Well, and I think the other important factor to remember is that utilizing the appropriate technology for your operation, while it can take some time to set up, it can save time and labor in the future if you're willing to put in some of that time on the front end to integrate it.
For sure. There's going to be frustration in the beginning of figuring out how to use it, and as time goes on, younger generations get re-involved into the farm and the ranch, and they're Heck, my kids are 4 and 6, and they can do more on my phone than I can, so it's just a natural progression. But yeah, there's going to be some pain of getting it implemented for sure, which, Performance Beef has got a whale of a good customer service team from the folks that I've been involved with, and they'll minimize that pain as best as possible. But what you get out of it on the backside, if you utilize it, is worth every bit of it.
The technology piece is very attractive for the younger generation. And I'm speaking as the younger generation who's, been back from college for a couple years now. And it's very attractive to have some of that technology. Not that we aren't willing to work hard, but it is nice to have some of those things in place to make it easier so we can put our time where it matters. And like you've talked about working in or on the business, it can create a lot more time to work on the business.
You made me remember another saying of, the old saying is work smarter, not harder. And I agree with that. But my other stance would be, how about you do both? And in the farm world, that's just the way it is. You're going to put your hours in, and that's how it is. But you have to work smarter and keep working hard to really make it jive, especially if you're first generation folks. That makes a big difference. And thank God for family, and thank God for generational transitions. And those are, in agriculture, just as a general comment, we need to be better about studying transitions 20 years before we think we're checking out of this world. And the profitability of that business, and knowing the profitability of that business, is a large portion of whether we got something good to transition or not.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that's very important. It's a big part of business. Now, I want to go back to, you made a comment about as you start scaling, being able to outsource and hand off maybe some of that book work or some other office work or whatever it may be. I mean, depending on people's areas of interest and talent and skill where they should be putting their time. What are some other factors that producers need to consider before they decide to scale their operation?
Well, okay, so factors to consider before you scale. So many times growth happens before the financials are ready for the growth. For instance, man, I made good money on that pen of cattle. Next time I'm going to buy 3. Well, buying 3 pens as opposed to 1 takes a larger equity requirement. It takes a lot more working capital. It takes a lot more equity horsepower to make it work. So don't outgrow your balance sheet, and more importantly, your cash flow ability, your working capital situation. Because, if you get within 60 days of getting to the finish line on that pen of cattle and you are flat broke, you don't have any cash to move, that makes for some interesting conversations with your banker. So work with your team on, okay, I want to grow. Can I financially do that? Don't outgrow your working capital is really, and that's hard because the market is the driving factor of the working capital. We're tied to the CME, and did you use price protections to put a floor on there so the board drops back 20, but I'm still selling at 10 over that. That's a working capital, but don't outgrow your balance sheet. Definitely don't outgrow your working capital.
Is there anything else you ask for from customers when they come to you saying they want to scale and, maybe that's going to require a bigger note than in the past? I mean, are you asking about how they're going to manage labor, if they're going to need additional employees, or anything else besides just looking at their numbers? You talked working capital and cash flow, but are there other factors you are asking them about?
So when somebody comes to me and wants to start a relationship, yeah, of course we dive into the numbers because that's what really drives it all. But I always go to the ranch first. Before we shake hands on a deal or anything, I think it's very important to go and actually see the operation, see what they've got going, and ask about their 10-year plan. Where you want to be in 10 years? Are we just trying to survive today, which is part of the process sometimes. We just got to get through today. But where do you want to go? How are we going to get there? What's that look like? How fast do you want to go? So there's a whole gamut of questions to ask, and it just depends on each person. I don't have a set checklist by any means, but where you want to go and how are we going to get there?
We've brought up long-term goals a couple times in this conversation. How much time each year do you think you spend talking with each individual customer and just checking in on those long-term goals, whether they've remained the same or changing or anything like that?
Not enough. I think it's so easy to be busy. The comment I make is it's too easy to be too busy when you're living life and trying to run a business and run a family, be in the family. And it's something we easily lose sight of in the day to day. But, personally, my wife and I, now it doesn't always happen this way, but, we try and sit down quarterly and say, okay, where are we going? Or at least a couple times a year. All right, what are we doing? What do we need to cut? Where do we need to go? And those conversations aren't always fun, but you still need to have them.
They can be challenging, but I always find some relief in at the end when we've talked about it. And my husband and I have a whiteboard with 1, 5, and 10-year goals and kind of a few quarterly things. And it's challenging because sometimes you sit there and it's like, well, I don't know what I want, but we usually know what we don't want. And that's sometimes where we start.
Yeah, my grandpa had a saying, what's easy usually isn't right, and what's right usually isn't easy. So the challenge, as you said, you just got to embrace it.
Absolutely. Well, Thaddeus, is there anything else you would like to share with the listeners out there today about anything we talked about, or just any final thoughts from your perspective?
Well, I guess I would just say I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. I'm glad we did, and I hope it helps build what you need to build, but build a good team. That's definitely what I would leave with is no matter who you're working with, make sure you have a good, solid, transparent relationship and build a good team. Surround yourself with not only like-minded people, but people that will challenge your train of thought, because a lot of times we can get entrenched in our own ways of doing things, and we miss a lot by not challenging ourselves to look at it differently. And I've heard this in agriculture for years of, well, that's the way Grandpa did it, so we're going to do it. And I feel like that has gotten better. I think as time marches on here, that mindset is becoming a little lesser. But don't be scared to look at different ways of doing things. And again, surround yourself with a good team. And that's not only your technology people, your accountant, bookkeepers, tax preparers, your banker for sure. But then don't get so busy making a living that you forget to make a life. So those are the things that are on my mind.
Well, and what a great final statement to share, because that's something that a lot of guests talk about, is building that team. So it's definitely important. For anyone out there listening, if you are interested in learning more about performance beef, there is a link in the show notes. So be sure to click that and check it out. But with that, take what Thaddeus said to heart and build your team and know your numbers, and don't be afraid to think outside the box and question things. But with that, happy ranching, folks, and we'll catch you on the next one.